Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhood. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate the path forward.
Welcome to today's episode of the Emerging Biotech Leader. Today, I'm so glad to welcome my colleague, Dr. Benit Maru, one of the leads on our medical team here at SSI Strategy. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about a couple of key themes about the role of the Chief Medical Officer, building on the prior episode with Dr. Steve Zelenkovsky. We're really going to highlight a few key themes around the role of the Chief Medical Officer and how it really complements the leadership style of the CEO that's in the organization, the structure of the medical office, not just the person in the role and the pieces that an organization really needs to be successful. And then how do you leverage that medical office and the individual in that CMO role to really build your program with the end in mind? How do you work backwards from the ultimate strategy and the ultimate goal that you're looking to build? So Benit, thank you so much for joining today. Really glad to have you here.
No worries. Thanks, Kim.
To start us off, I really want to touch on that first theme about the role of the CMO, the leadership style of the CEO, and in particular, the right timing to bring on a chief medical officer. I know recently we've been working more and more with early stage organizations that are really teetering with, is now the right time? Do we have enough work? Do we have enough funding to bring somebody on? What do we really need out of a chief medical officer between investor conversations and scientific leadership? How do you think about the right timing for the role kind of as a starting point?
So I don't think it's ever too early, in all honesty, with regard to, when to bring somebody on. If you think about an asset that's been developed, in an academic setting, and then it's transferred across, knowing what the discussion to have, how to have that discussion from an investor perspective is extremely important, and having somebody that's able to tie the scientific narrative to the clinical narrative, but then what it also means to a landscape, I think is extremely important. And with the greatest respect, academic founders sometimes don't have the experience to be able to, see that narrative through. And I think Steve mentioned it in his conversation. The science is the science, and then there is an art to the latter point. So I would agree with that completely. It's also about the message that you want to send, because ultimately the asset is a product for whatever disease state it may be. And, patient groups are very active already. And if they see certain announcements, there will always be natural curiosity. So I do think it's important to have somebody that's able to kind of tether the messaging across on what it could mean, but also tamper expectations, because if it's, a significant unmet need and there's no treatments there, expectations go through the roof, rightly so, in all honesty. But then, it is kind of the responsibility of the organization to tamper those down a bit as well. So so in that regard, I don't think it's ever early enough.
So let me take that back and translate it in a little bit of a different way. So I think what I'm hearing is, if an organization is in a rare disease or in a high unmet need population, or maybe just take it a step further, in a new modality or doing something a little bit differently than the market has ever seen or patients have ever seen before, those are the organizations where you should really at least bring on somebody who can bridge the internal science to the clinical plan, but also the patient, caregiver, physician, understanding of what's being developed in parallel to doing the same for investors.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's fair. That's a very good summary. The one addition I guess I would have to that as well is, if you are a Me Too product, and in whatever it may be, and you're trying to raise funds, you probably need some of that. So it's where there's going to be specific nuances around differentiation as well, and what the value of the asset is. So if it's Me Too there, but then the other is fair, whether it's a novel modality or if it's in a high unmet need area.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point on organizations where maybe there is a standard of care or precedent, and you're really coming in, whether it's directly a Me Too or something else that might be targeting a different mechanism, whatever it might be, there's still the differentiation that's really required. And there's a lot of different variables you can use to differentiate, whether it's the quality of life variables for the patient, whether it's an easier route of administration, whether it's the economic argument overall. but a lot of things that in that situation you'd want to bring forward that really take a different phenotype of a chief medical officer. So maybe we can shift a little bit about the role of the chief medical officer relative to assets.
And just on that, current lived experience as well, thinking through, what we need to do for a product that's going to market where there's something there. It is actually extremely important to have somebody that has an understanding of what the translation would be, but what the regulatory pathway would be, because if it is a slightly different modality or you're going after a different age group, then there's also, the regulatory need. And Steve made the comment that you need to kind of have a good understanding of what the regulatory pathways are as well. That's what I was going to say. I think that in that sense, it is extremely important.
Absolutely. So when you think about that and the role of the chief medical officer, Steve kind of referenced this idea of an octopus that, you need 8 legs to be a really great chief medical officer. He's speaking from decades of experience, both in big pharma and early biotech playing these roles. And, from his years of being in different roles in different organizations, he's really figured out, where do I need to supplement? Where are my strengths? Where do I need to kind of build an organization around me? And I think it's a really important point to think about, where is the program? What kind of program are we talking about, to figure out what pieces you need to put together, or what legs of the octopus you're really going to need to supplement the chief medical officer if we're going to continue to build on that analogy. So maybe you could give some thoughts on what other pieces need to be developed, and how do you think about building that in early organizations where investment, typically is really focused on clinical and regulatory, but the other pieces are just important at that early stage.
Yeah, I really like the analogy as well, and I kind of think about it in the sense, like, with regard to the tentacles, it's really important for the CMO themselves to understand which of my tentacles are the strongest, which are kind of the weakest, which need more work. And I think it's really important to have that wherewithal and, knowledge of the self about, actually, this is where my strengths are. This is where I know I need some support. So, I think that's important, number one. I think the other piece is, you touched on this earlier about the relationship with the CEO, understanding, having a good relationship with the CEO where they're open to the idea, because he's talked about, people think it's an N of one, you're, everything to everybody. You may not be, and it's okay, because it's not human to be able to do all of these kind of things. And if you find that, then you found a unicorn, and never let that person go. But in reality, it's difficult. You may have 6 out of the 8, 4 out of the 8, whatever it may be. But those that are most important is probably what's drawn you to that organization as well. So the understanding with the CEO in that regard becomes really important. Having the wherewithal yourself to acknowledge, this is my gap, and owning it, rather than because we know in organizations where there's been CMOs before, where they've basically tried to take everything on, and they've tried to take all of these, responsibilities on, and they've just unfortunately not been successful. So then we've had to kind of talk to them or support them through as well. So those pieces are really important. And then, which levers do you need to pull? Where do you need the most strength? It does genuinely depend on what's the landscape that you're going into, and which inflection point are you trying to reach. So if you're at that non-clinical to clinical translational piece, the first in human piece, he's mentioned operations. I think operations are extremely important, and that's something else that needs to come in. We need to think about medical messaging as early as possible as well. So where does the medical affairs arm come in? Where does advocacy come in? And which of those, tentacles, can you spread, which are you good at? Because it's great for an advocacy organization to have the chief medical officer or a CEO of a company speak at an event, but some people may not necessarily be as au fait with that. Some people may not have been patient facing. So there's just these kind of things to think about. I think the other important aspect is the importance of the support from like a PMO, like project management organization as well, because early biotech is fast paced. Things happen, in parallel, which sometimes happens sequentially if you're coming from a large pharma organization, and you need to, think quick and react. And you need to be both reactive and proactive. And so much cross-functional work is needed, whether that be with the regulatory group, the non-clinical group, even the CMC group. I think just having a good handle on what needs to happen is extremely important. I think that's where the PMO comes in as well, because I do think early organizations forget the value of a PMO as well.
I completely agree. And as you were describing that, my head went to a number of other strange analogies, from moving the octopus to a little bit of a spider web, where you really need to be able to connect all of the different arms or pieces, and an inability to do that is really what inhibits an organization from moving their programs forward, at least at the pace where they need to, or their investors are expecting, and in many circumstances, patients are expecting of them as well. And so when I think about an effective either project management, or program leadership type structure, and all of those different ones kind of make sense in different organizations, there's a lot of different constructs of that. However, the organizations who are thoughtful about bringing it in early and building that as a core competency of the organization, in our experience, at least seem to be doing a lot better. And I'm highly encouraged from conversations I've had with executives, I would say over the last couple of months, coming out of conferences like Bio and places like that. I'm hearing more and more that a head of program management or program leadership are actually some of the earliest hires in the organization, around the same time as the chief medical officer, which is probably one of the most interesting shifts that I'm seeing relative to organizational build that I think will have a major impact on the industry.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think I agree. I mean, I've seen some of those similar trends as well. And again, going back to some of the places, well, you and I know as well, where there was there wasn't as much keenness to bring that real level of rigor in. And unfortunately, they just, things don't necessarily pan out well enough for them as well. But I do think the value of that organization is extremely important, because if you think about, what the phenotype of the functions would be, what would the phenotypical representation would be, let's say with this in the medical office or in the regulatory or even CMC, we all come up with different backgrounds and, with different experiences. So even from a clinical perspective, yes, it's brilliant, being a doctor, you're in a clinic, you may be an attending, but think about all the people that you have that are ancillary to you, that support you in that patient care piece. You've got all the other allied healthcare professionals, you've got the reception, you've got such a team around you, and none of it works, without the care coordinators.
I think it's a fantastic analogy. Care coordinators, patient navigators, those kinds of roles are so critical to getting patients the care they need. And I like the analogy that you just provided around, being in a direct patient care setting. You are used to having a team around you. It certainly parallels also individuals who come from a large pharma environment, who are typically used to having an infrastructure around them, or people that they can rely on to really supplement. So can you maybe speak to your personal experience on how do you take a step back and be introspective on the things that you're good at or not good at? And I know this goes back to your earlier point on your relationship with the CEO as well. How do you build the confidence and the comfort to raise your hand and say, I know I'm really great at X, but I need help in Y. And that doesn't make me a weak leader. It makes me a stronger leader. How do you get there?
I mean, there's multiple ways of doing it, I think. And I think the first one is trial and error, because and it's not a great answer, but it's more of a case of, you take a few steps forward, you've fallen down, but it's more about, how you're getting up. That one failure that you've had, it's not necessarily even a failure, but it's a step back or a pushback because you've had a certain comment. How are you reacting to that? How do you take that on board? I think to me, that's actually the most important thing. As I was coming up through the years as well, I remember certain conversations that I had, and one of our colleagues, Jen, mentioned very kindly, she made some very pointed comments, and actually made me think, actually, no, she's right. And as long as you're self-reflective and you're welcoming of what people are saying, because they're saying it from a good place, they're not saying it to bring you down, they're not saying it to criticize you, it makes you think, okay, well, that's a fair comment. How can I adapt to that? And then if the persons that made that comment to you isn't the one that's giving you the feedback, then actually ask others around you and say, how could I improve this? I mean, just don't be afraid to ask the question. Yes, you're meant to be seen as that leader, and yes, you're meant to be seen as the one with all the answers, because ultimately the accountability is with you. But you also have to acknowledge if you don't know, you don't know. I go back to like the clinical aspect. You're part of the multidisciplinary team. yes, again, if you're the attending, the ultimate patient care rests with you. But you may not know everything that's going on with the patient. You may need to ask the lab technician about what's going on with their bloods. You may need to go to one of the clinical scientists to explain, some of the things that are there. You need to bring other people in to give you the full picture. To me, there's no difference, because it's the case of it's life or death. I have no problem putting my ego at the door to make sure somebody survives. Why would you not apply that same principle throughout the rest of life, I guess?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with everything you just described more. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with the CMO of another organization maybe 6 or 7 months ago. And he was talking about the dynamics with his team and his program team. And he was sitting in these program team meetings, and people were looking at him just expecting him to give the answer. He's like, I didn't build a team to tell you all the answers. I don't know all of the answers, and I should never be expected to know all of the answers. To your point, I have accountability. I need to make sure that we're making the best decisions given all of the different stakeholders and the variables that we have in front of us. But I need the team to debate. I need to bring in people that have great skills and insights from all different areas, and I need them to come up with solutions. And I'm happy to be part of that. I can make final decisions on these pieces, but I can't walk into a meeting and tell everybody every answer. That's going to make the program worse, not better overall.
I think that's great. I mean, just personal experience, even more recently, working with the CEO, who was very frank and transparent in terms of, you just tell me what it is that you need, what else it is you need, areas of that we can cover, and then we go from there. Because ultimately, we want the smartest people around the table to all give us an opinion. We can go in with a point of view, but then we have a debate. As long as you're welcoming to have that debate, that shows you as the leader that you've brought these people around you and you're willing to listen to what they've said. Ultimately, the decision is yours, and you can take all that feedback in any way, shape, or form that you choose. But the fact that you've kind of tried to get a 360 of opinion and actively seek out people that are, counter to what your perspective is as well, because it's better to understand where they're coming from rather than just blanketly thinking, okay, this is the right path forward, this is a path forward, and then you're not going to be able. So one of the reasons why that's important is because you always want to think with the end in mind. You always have an approach of where you want to get to, but you need to be adaptable because things never go as planned. One of the ways that helps you mitigate for that is actually if you have conversations with different people from different groups that are counter to yours, it's already put in your mind, whatever that, change to your pathway is, it's already probably given you a solution, and you've probably had that discussion several months before, which would actually enable you to be more efficient and more adaptable. So bringing in lots and lots of different views from the beginning isn't a bad thing. The one caution I will say is if you are unable to, compartmentalize those thoughts, and if it just creates a swirl, then that's actually an area where you need to grow and where you need somebody to help you compartmentalize those thoughts as well. Because sometimes people will get lots of opinions and they won't know what to do with them, and then they'll swell. And if that happens to be whatever that phenotype is of, the person, actually you just need somebody to ground you.
Absolutely. And it goes back to your earlier point on why program management and program leadership is so important in an early organization, that those people can ask hard questions and they can be the grounding of, it's fantastic. We've gotten inputs from all of these different stakeholders, different KOLs, you name it. Now this is how we have to make the decision that's best for the organization.
But also, I mean, I agree, and not but and also, sometimes you kind of have a discussion around something which just becomes completely enthralling, and you go down that rabbit hole. You need somebody to pull you out sometimes as well.
It's a great point, and honestly, we get to work on very cool projects. I think they're a lot of fun and fascinating and scientifically interesting questions, and so it is easy to wind up down rabbit holes that are fascinating and exciting, and I'm sure will create a lot of additional innovation, but can certainly slow down decision making for the program at hand. And so making sure that you're balancing what's exciting and innovation for the future versus what do we need to do now, and how do we make sure that we're getting it done.
And that's actually really important for when you think about, where did this asset come from? And if there is kind of that academic founder, that's part of the organization you've gone through. Yes, it could be a great thought experiment, and yes, it could be great for future publications and things like that, to your point, but you need the grounding of like, yes, that may be great, but it's not great for this. So sometimes, where the academic and the commercial intersection occurs, there is a bit of friction, and that's one of the reasons why. And it's not to say we won't do it, it's just we don't, our efforts should be focused here. We can come back to that. So there is that, interesting piece around working within that environment as well.
Absolutely. So we touched on a lot of really critical pieces here, in particular, kind of the humility of understanding where you might have gaps, how to build an organization around it, recognizing that there's probably pieces or skills for everybody that they should be looking to supplement, to really make sure that you're getting the best outcome for the program and your patients, and creating as a leader some of the psychological safety for people to debate and provide additional ideas to drive the program forward, and really building with that end in mind. But for a final question here, Benit, do you have any advice to a new CMO coming into the role, let's say with a more headstrong CEO who thinks that the one person has to do it themselves? What kind of advice would you provide a CMO in that kind of a position who really is struggling with finding their voice for what kind of support they might need in order to be successful?
Well, some of it depends on the network that CMO, the new person has as well. I mean, I would ask them to see what connections they have outside of your organization, that may have other CEOs, because I think having information about how others have done it well, and just giving other, examples of, I know XYZ person, they worked like this and they did like that. So sometimes that is helpful, because if you've come in and you're a new CMO, the simple response could be, well, this is the first time you're doing that. You could be dismissed. So ask questions of, your trusted network, because your trusted network will know other CEOs, where you can pull in advice and you can pull in support. And I think we've talked about this before as well, is, like having a network, where CMOs can get together and just building that. I think that's useful, because you should ask other CMOs that you may know who have had that, just to understand what the challenges are. The other aspect to that is also try to understand where the CEO is coming from. And if it is something that they've just done historically and that's kind of what's got them there, then it's kind of thinking about how you can re-educate is probably not the right word, but help them see a different perspective, because just because that's something they've always done doesn't mean that that's something they should always do. So just try and kind of get that position from them as well. It's tough in that regard, because CEOs, they're a CEO for a reason. So I think leveraging what who you may know to give you some guidance in terms of having discussions with them is great. Seeing if there's common ground or common connections as well, and seeing if there's any discussion you can have there.
Yeah, certainly not a new issue in the industry. We run into it all the time. If anybody is listening and is in that situation without the right network, please do reach out to us. We're more than happy to make connections. We might be able to help you through it. I think it is great advice, Benit. There's power in your network and power in experiences that you can really lean on in order to really best demonstrate the support structure you need to really build the program, build the company, and make sure it's overall a huge success. So thank you so much for joining the episode today. It was great to chat with you.
No worries. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI Strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.